Great. And while we get started, maybe colleagues could put your name, location, and organization in the chat just so we can get to know a little bit who is online. And we'll also launch a quick poll before we get started. So colleagues, that should come up on screen. Just to know your focus and a little bit on what you think the most effective way to electrify off-grid refugee camps. Um, so that would be great. That should come online soon. But for now, I think we can get started. So a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So really good to see so many faces who have both been in the sector, maybe some who are new and some who've also been very closely engaged in this project. So very warm welcome. Really happy for the conversation today. My name is Amy Jakes, working with the GPA Coordination Unit as our strategy and partnership lead, and I will guide the conversation today. Yeah, we're really excited to have this session, which really dives into the details and really some evidence coming out of our program, Transforming Humanitarian Energy Access, THEA, which is funded by FCDO through the T program, which is really focused on research for looking at new innovative models to increase energy access in displacement settings. So we'll do a deep dive on a mini grid in Sheder, Ethiopia, and really dive into the lessons learned. So we're really glad to host this dialogue and yeah, share this learning with the wider sector because it's one project that we've been seeing for many years. It's quite a lighthouse project for the sector and something we also want to see much more of in the years to come. So very quick information. We'll have for the webinar, we'll have a quick intro to the topic, a presentation from Mercy Corps and Humanitarian Energy PLC from some recent impact assessments that have been done, and then a podcast style interview with the experts. So please, throughout the dialogue, if you have questions, please add them in the chat and we'll answer them in around a 20-minute Q&A session at the end. And please just try to keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking, but if you do come on at the end, please turn your camera on and try to ask your question. That would be great. So Mariana, if we could go to the next slide. Just to briefly set the scene. Yeah, the next one. In terms of kind of the scale that we're looking at. So as of today, there's over 120 million people displaced globally, 76+% of those who are living in low and middle income countries, usually kind of in proximity to the areas where they're displaced from. We've done some recent modeling that shows around 40 million displaced people are lacking access to electricity in Africa, and around 50 million are lacking access to clean cooking solutions. So those are people usually outside of kind of national energy, national development plans who are really lacking this energy access and possibly unseen in these global SDG 7 efforts that we're all kind of on the journey of. And in addition, we've done some recent modeling that looks really at the humanitarian sector and how much they spend on diesel for powering their operations, and see that over $100 million is spent annually. So that's quite a lot of money that really could be, if the right delivery models are in place, switched to renewable energy. And we can go to the next slide. And here today, we're really talking about a project that has taken a private sector-led delivery approach. So some barriers to private sector entry, but also some opportunities for the sector to think of. I think there's probably three key main barriers that we see from the private sector side. Usually refugee camps, IDP settlements, areas where there's forced displacement, often are an unseen or untapped market opportunity. A lot of the community, ability to pay, the amount of people that are there, the current services that they offer or have access to or don't have access to are sometimes unknown. And so this is for the private sector an unseen or untapped market. There's also sometimes affordability issues and access to finance issues for end users. So some people who are refugees or IDPs aren't always included in national systems. So lacking bank accounts, lacking access to finance. Sometimes there's policies that are a bit restrictive to livelihoods and income generation. And so that's one barrier as well. And then also from the investor and donor side, sometimes there's this perceived or real risk of investment, which makes the capital cost for things like mini grids or off-grid solar often go up in these contexts. But we do also see a lot of opportunities. In refugee and IDP areas, there's often a stable longer-term demand. Despite the perception of these places being short-term, often the average stay or lifetime of a camp or settlement is over 10 years, and usually it's quite a large population density. So that's really a user group that's possibly easy to tap into depending on the location. There's this big M300 political momentum and really large-scale energy access financing coming on board, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which really can also be leveraged for some of these locations, especially by private sector companies who are looking to deliver energy services there. Many people in the sector also know, especially on the humanitarian side, that a lot of the funding has shifted this year. And so it's really critical to kind of remove or shift the reliance on humanitarian aid for energy access and really go over to more bigger development budgets for really stimulating economic development in these locations that then can provide longer term energy access and market building. So energy is really an enabler and an anchor for that. Also, we've seen some growing inclusive policies, especially in, for instance, Uganda, the energy access, the EASP program, and the UACCC subsidies specifically actually includes refugees. So, and we have a briefing note to launch actually quite soon on this that landscapes a bit across a few countries. So that kind of inclusion on the policy environment really opens up possible market development in these areas. And then we also have really some proven good practice of actually private sector-led energy access delivery from Humanitarian Energy Plc and Mercy Corps, as we'll see today. There's a mini grid, actually, you can see on the slide by Renuvia. That was an initial 50 kilowatt peak that's now scaling to 2 megawatts, also with private sector investment and a few other programs. So I think maybe 5, 6 years ago, we would say, okay, there's some nascent experience, but yeah, where are the proof points? And now we really have them. And so with that, we will dive into the Shedder mini grid in a dialogue to look at one of those proof points. And I hope it inspires the sector and stakeholders on this call. With that, I think I'll pass it over to you, Megan. You're on mute.
Sorry, I just realized I was still on mute. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us again for our deep dive into the project that we've been working on in Shedder. Before I go into that, I think Mariana's just issued our poll. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your general experience. So I think you've got 2 questions on the screen. So one of them is around which area do you work in? So we have a few like suspected sectors in terms of humanitarian aid, energy access separately, but then we might have people who have a specific humanitarian energy focus. If you're very curious to see if there are people from completely outside of this space doing something completely different. That's the first question. And then if you could also please answer the second question. No right or wrong answers, presumably, but what do you think is the most effective way to electrify off-grid refugee camps? Interesting. So I think the answers are still coming in, and we have a majority of respondents working on energy access more broadly, but maybe not necessarily in a humanitarian context. We do also have quite a few people who do have a humanitarian energy focus, and other participants who just work in humanitarian aid more broadly. And maybe we're slightly biased through the topic of this webinar, but it does seem that the majority of respondents think that mini grids are quite an effective way to electrify off-grid refugee camps. Let's delve into if that's the case or not in our example. Great, thanks so much, Mariana, for that. I'm going to end the poll now. And if you could move to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. Before we go into more details on the project, let me just introduce you to the THEA program, of which I'm the program manager. Next slide, please. So THEA stands for the Transforming Humanitarian Energy Access Program, and it's funded by the UK government as part of their Transforming Energy Access platform, which is managed by the Carbon Trust. Mercy Corps are the lead implementers, and we work in partnership with Ashton and the GPA on this program, which began last year in September and will go on until next December. In a nutshell, THEA's main focus is to identify and promote more inclusive, more sustainable energy delivery models specifically for humanitarian contexts. And we're deliberately working in quite different contexts in order to gain, to be able to derive different lessons learned in terms of the market readiness and the conditions of working in these different contexts and what that means for how energy needs to be delivered. So far we have a focus on Uganda, Ethiopia, and Bangladesh, and also doing a bit of work in Kenya. Next slide, please. So THEA has three main work streams, which can be grouped into research, implementation, and advocacy. So the first pillar on research is essentially trying to just build the evidence base and strengthen it on what is working in terms of energy access and how energy is delivered in humanitarian setting and what needs to be changed. So we have a variety of briefing notes that we're working on, including on the topics of inclusive financing, inclusive policies, and inclusive partnerships. We issue regular kind of update reports on the general state of the sector, including our annual Humanitarian Energy Report. And then a big component of this work stream is also just supporting different ways to disseminate the knowledge that's coming out of the program, but also work that our partners are doing more broadly on the topic. Part of this research is also, again, taking stock of what is currently working already in the space, and that's kind of where the impact assessments that we'll present shortly fall into. The second pillar around implementation is that we are trialing different new ways of supporting energy access in like testing different models essentially of how we can improve the way that energy access is delivered in humanitarian settings. So we're doing quite a range of different things. So on the one hand, our partner Ashton is leading a component on microgrants for refugee-led energy organizations and businesses in Kenya, Uganda, and in Ethiopia. We're also working on an e-cooking pilot in Bangladesh, and more recently, we're about to launch a new financing facility that's dedicated to supporting off-grid energy companies who are looking to work in refugee settlements in Uganda. So yeah, that's the kind of implementation space, and we're also again trying to look at what is already happening in the sector and deriving lessons learned from that, and then building on both our research and the new evidence that is coming out of our implementation. We have a strong advocacy component as well, in which we really are trying to promote and mainstream the topic of humanitarian energy within our partner networks. We work with specific individuals and try to promote key advocacy messages and help them essentially champion the topic within the different organizations that they work for. And then we have one specific kind of broader research piece that's about what are the kind of main barriers that we see when it comes to private sector delivery for energy access, and what needs to be done, and what can we advocate for to change and to eliminate those barriers. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, as part of THEA, we had the opportunity of looking into the work that Mercy Corps has been doing with humanitarian energy in Ethiopia in the Shedder refugee camp through the mini-grid. So we'd love to share some of the main findings from these two impact assessments. Before we go into the findings, just a brief overview of the mini-grid and the project. Right, next slide, please. Great. So the mini-grid was supported through Mercy Corps' Enter Energy program. And basically the mini-grid is, in a nutshell, it's a 254 kilowatt peak system which was installed back in May 2024. And as a fun fact, it's actually the first mini-grid countrywide that was commercially licensed under the new mini-grid directive, which is a bit of a flagship project in and of itself. So Mercy Corps basically established a special purpose vehicle, which is Humanitarian Energy Plc, a locally registered Ethiopian company that both installed and now currently operates the mini-grid. We work together with Rensis Engineering, who is the main construction contractor and is a minority shareholder of the mini-grid. Next slide, please. To date, we have been able to connect up to, or I think it's slightly over 1,200 refugee households, 105 businesses and 6 institutions, as well as more recently expanding into the host community, and have been connected over 100 households and businesses, and have also established a PUE hub for businesses with higher electricity loads. Very excitingly, very recently, as of last week, I believe, we were able to connect an Ethio telecom tower, who will be acting as an anchor client. And I think my colleague will be sharing more about that development later. Thanks for the applause that I see coming through. That is indeed a milestone. In general, in terms of Mercy Corps' collaboration with Humanitarian Energy, what our contribution was essentially to really support with the demand side of things. So that included providing electric appliances at a subsidized rate to stimulate demand from businesses. We supported a lot with the stakeholder relations and management, as well as providing market intelligence and support with logistics and camp access. And just one more important feature to note of the project is that we've worked very closely with a community-led electricity committee, who is the main kind of feedback source and responsible for managing customer concerns. Next slide, please. So that was the mini grid, I think, in a nutshell. And before we go into the findings of the assessment, we'd love to hear from you. What do you expect the key benefits of the mini grid would be? Bear with us as we're showing you the sliders. So I believe you should be able to either scan the QR code, or in the chat, you should get the link in which you can answer the question. Again, there's a variety of correct answers. We really like to, or be quite curious to hear what you would expect. So we've got reliable energy as one. See some participants typing. Economic opportunities. Great to see some more participants typing. So safety, multiple applications, reaching off-grid areas. Yep, all very relevant points, as we will see shortly. Reliable, safe, just, and affordable energy access, scalability. Reasonable tariffs, interesting point. We'll definitely have something to say about that. Yeah, local economic development, a sense of enhanced security and nighttime safety, consistency and reliability. Great answers. Again, a lot of things that we recognize and have been seeing ourselves, as I will explain shortly. Great, I still see some people typing, so we'll give it a few more minutes. Better quality of life. Great. Modularity, reliability, and scalability, great points. Promotion of self-reliance, yeah, very important. Great, thank you all so much for those answers. I think we can move on to the presentation and delve into some of the findings and see to what extent your expected key benefits match with what we've seen on the ground. And spoiler alert, I think you have predicted quite a few of the things that we have indeed witnessed from the impact assessment. So next slide, please. Just give a second to switch to the slides. Excellent. So we did 2 different impact assessments. I'll start off with the socio-economic impact assessment, which was conducted by 60 Decibels, before handing over to my colleague Tillin for our other more financial focused assessment. Next slide, please. Great. So there were a lot of really positive findings that came out of the assessment, which were really encouraging. And first and foremost, we just saw that almost everyone essentially had transitioned from more traditional energy sources to using the mini grid, and therefore accessing more modern, efficient, less polluting sources. So you can see that previously torches and generators and kerosene lamps kind of ranked among the highest, most common sources of electricity, which have now in large part been replaced, again, through access to the mini-grid. Next slide, please. A big one was in general that over 2/3 of customers reported that their quality of life has indeed significantly improved because of the humanitarian energy mini-grid connection. And the kind of key features that people mentioned was having improved access to lighting, being able to use more and different appliances, and then also just being able to charge mobile phones is of course huge. Next slide, please. Safety perception, that was one. Could you go back to number 3, please? Great, thanks. Safety perception was one that came up in the Slido just now as well, and indeed, the majority of customers reported feeling safer in their homes and businesses because of the mini-grid connection, and that was also something that we saw that was more prevalent, and female customers were more likely to report that that was something that had that sense of safety had very much improved compared to male customers. Next slide, please. One that was really important to us and we were really glad to see was that spending on energy for the vast majority of customers has gone down because of access to the mini-grid services, which I think is really important and drives home the point that people are actually already in refugee camps are actually spending a lot of money on less reliable, lower quality, less sustainable energy products. And actually when they get access to more reliable electricity, their energy spending also goes down. What we have seen is that for some customers, there has been a bit of an increase, and there's also, I'll touch on another point around financial burden shortly, but in general, we found this finding really encouraging. Next slide, please. And this was another point that came up a few times in the Slido. We saw that most customers, or almost all customers, in fact, who use the mini-grid for income generating activities really have seen that their incomes have increased as a result. And of course, and as you can see, over 2/3, in fact, said that it had very much increased, which again has huge implications for economic opportunities and productivity. Next slide, please. Here are just a few quotes from customers about the benefits of the mini-grid. So I think one of the most common appliances were fridges, and that having access to the power really helps with businesses in which their people are selling fresh, like food or cold beverages, etc., and also being able to have longer opening hours. There is also a quote about shifting from kerosene and firewood, which has reduced household expenses and also minimizes indoor air pollution. And just in general, having 24 hours access a day has really, influenced things like improved lighting and phone charging and being able to work with appliances. Next slide, please. So as you might have noticed, I've just whizzed through quite a range of really positive outcomes. Of course, there's always some things or areas in which there's room for improvement, and we see that although the majority of people report that they're able to afford the payments, we do see that there's still about 20% that say that the payments for the mini-grid are a burden, and 4% would say that it's a heavy burden, suggesting that they're over indebted. And I think that's a huge question for us, realizing that in general, of course, this kind of project has been able to really benefit and serve the majority of the customers in the camp. But at the same time, we're realizing that the more vulnerable customer segment might still be facing significant affordability issues. And again, that's something we're having to now think about what we can essentially do about that. With that, I'll hand over to my colleague Tillen for some more reflections on the general finances or financial side of the mini-grid.
Thank you, Megan. And hi, everyone. My name is Tillen Ogola. I lead the Anti-Energy program, which essentially promotes commercial model in refugee settings. And with that, can we please move to the next slide? I think what you're trying to show here is to at least put out the signals that we've seen from the mini grid we established a year ago in Ethiopia. And of course, as Megan had mentioned, we worked with Cross Boundary, who's an independent evaluator, to at least support in collecting the specific impact that we are seeing in this site. So this data that we are showing is up to 31st March 2025. And you can clearly see a comparison between our target and current average, and then of course the status as the RAG ranking. In terms of customer, in terms of percentage of customers that are engaged in payment, I think I'll talk more about that, but you can clearly see that's one of the areas that is quite encouraging. Of course, there is amber here in terms of the number of connections that we had anticipated versus what we had achieved, and I'll also talk more about that. So ideally, in a nutshell, this is just a high-level, snapshot of the performance, from reduced energy spending, which we've also seen in the polls, to over indebtedness. Of course, when designing this mini grid, one of the interesting factors we had in mind was, of course, just only targeting 90% of the population, since we were also very aware about the challenges in this area. So, and with that, I'll move to the next slide so that we can do a deep dive in terms of the actual findings from this cost boundary study. As I had mentioned, we had initially targeted close to 1,600 customers, but unfortunately, we were only able to achieve a lower number. And of course, this is, attributed to the fact that a lot of refugees moved out of this site. And of course, the other thing that we are learning, especially from a design perspective, is it's very important to understand, your target, let's say the target households. So ideally in the refugee camps, there is what we call shelters and households, and there is always that tendency of, over-reporting. And ideally, if you're doing your technical design and rely on those kinds of figure, then of course, these are some of the challenges that we have seen. But that said, I think on the positive side, we are seeing very encouraging number in terms of consumption, and largely driven by businesses, right? So on the right side, on the top graph, you'll see that, of course, our targeted large business was 6, and we were able to achieve 10. And then, of course, in terms of the households, so what we did in this site, we, of course, combined single-phase customers, and this, of course, includes the households and businesses. And in refugee context, a lot of businesses are just attached to the households. So we have a lot of refugee-owned businesses, close to 105 in this site. So from a consumption perspective, we did also try to compare the consumption in this site with industry average. And you can clearly see that, despite all this perception around refugee market being a very tricky one in terms of consumption, we are seeing very interesting figures. And you can clearly see on household, we are, the consumption here is quite high compared to the regional average, right? West Africa, East Africa, which is, quite an interesting signal for us, especially as we now try to think about scale. On a business perspective, now just comparing Shedder site alone, we've always, I think perhaps this is something that we always encourage on our design perspective, to always underpin the design on businesses, income generating activities. And you can clearly see that in this site, we are looking at close to 3 times the consumption. Of course, the businesses are doing quite well. And this is a combination of both the larger businesses and the refugee-owned businesses. So this is slightly higher, it's actually higher compared to the East Africa and South Africa average, and almost just, marginally lower compared to what we are seeing in West and Central Africa, where businesses are consuming quite high. So this is encouraging, and it clearly shows how businesses can underpin the mini-grid model. And then, of course, I'll move to the next slide to just do a deep dive in terms of these figures. So I've already spoken about the average consumption per user and ARPU, which means average revenue per user. So in this site, what we are seeing is that, and I'll just give a quick background. In this site, we are using what we call prepaid meter. So you pay upfront, as opposed to waiting by the end of the month. So this metric typically will show the indebtedness and activeness of the meter. So in this site, I can say that 82% of the customers are recharging their balances every month. And then if you just do a projection of 60 days, we are looking at close to 97, up to 90 to 95% in terms of activeness of the meter. Of course, we also do recognize that we've seen that people, some of the households have moved out of the area, and that also contributes to the percentages that are inactive. We are also seeing in this site that initially the poorer households are now sharing meters with the initially connected households. So these are very interesting insights that we've seen in this site. And also, you can clearly see the average consumption per user. I had spoken about this, and this is combining businesses, or rather all users in this site. It's rising, and of course, this is in March, and my colleague had also spoken about us now connecting a mobile telecom tower, which is now doing close to 2,000 units of electricity a month, and clearly an anchor client for us. We are also bringing online electric, e-cooking within the site, and we are also in the coming months also onboarding millers. So this number in terms of consumption will definitely go higher, as these figures are only relating to March. On revenue, on ETB terms, this is the Ethiopian birr, local currency. You can clearly see that revenue is also following the consumption pattern, which of course shows that the mini grid is quite viable. But then when you start thinking about that from a USD perspective, can we move to the next slide? I think it's jump here. So when we think about it from a USD perspective, we can clearly see a sharp drop in June, July, thereabout, and this is attributed to the devaluation of the currency. So of course, this is now a challenge to this site, especially if you start having a lot of OPEX or operational cost in USD. Then this becomes a challenge. So this is some of the effects that we are seeing, especially operating in this area, and that's why we always feel that de-risking this investment through a different mix of capital makes sense, because these are shocks that we believe typical commercial business will not, let's say, cover. So you can clearly see, and I want to emphasize this challenge on the devaluation. ETB terms, the revenue is rising, and then in terms of the USD term, in USD terms, you can clearly see the sharp drop. Of course, it's still marginally lower than the industry average of almost $3 a month. Currently, we are at an ARPU of 2.7 thereabout. So next slide. This is exactly what I was talking about. So we wanted to just show you how the mini grid has evolved in terms of covering our OPEX. And you can clearly see when we started, of course, the revenues were high, and then of course we were onboarding and setting up our infrastructure, and that's why also the OPEX moved quite high in the initial 3 months of installation. And then March thereabout, we started seeing a very interesting trend. So in this site now, we are I can't say we are covering our OPEX, our site level OPEX, but then of course more work needs to be done in terms of bringing more sites on board so that we can spread all these costs that you're seeing on the left side on the pie chart. You can clearly see the biggest driver here is staff cost, and these are fixed costs. And for us to make this model viable, of course, will require bringing more sites online, as I had mentioned before. So I'll move on to the next slide in the interest of time. And what we want to capture from you guys is, a quick poll just to understand the key challenges, both perceived and real, when installing mini grids in this setting. So, yeah. Can we have the slide?
Go back to the Slido. So if you can click the link, that would be great. And a new question should pop up now. And probably for you, Tilin, Andrea, colleagues on the line, there's two questions, which maybe you can also answer in a bit the next component, and then maybe in the Q&A. So what is the business model of the private entity involved in the project? Meaning, what is their return on investment? And then is this effort focused on refugees only? Of course, Ethiopia also has many IDPs, not only refugees. So in addition, some support to IDPs include electric injera cookers, always a good one there for Ethiopia, which may have sustainability issues. So some questions to maybe cover there in the next podcast style discussion. And then one more, I see from slide 1 that 1 in 5 customers find the payment to be a burden. What is the innovative financing model to solve this issue? So some really good questions coming in. Thank you, colleagues listening in. Great. And on the Slido, I don't see any answers coming in, but I see people typing. So what are the biggest challenges to installing a mini grid in a refugee camp? See if anything comes in on the Slido. All right, I don't know why the answers aren't coming up, but maybe I'll give it 10 more seconds and then move on to the discussion. There we go. Okay, so capacity of refugees to pay a tariff that allows sustainability. Local regulations and policies, definitely. Limited ability to pay. Availability of space, of course, that there's not land to put the mini grid on. Great. Thank you, everyone. I think those are all very, very resonant with anyone who has had experience on this topic. And I think now we can go into a little bit of a podcast style interview. So Megan, if you want to facilitate the discussion, that would be great.
Great, thanks so much. With me today, I have three of my colleagues. So Almas Tedeste from Mercy Corps, Desalen Getane from Humanitarian Energy, and Andrea Ranzanici from Mercy Corps. We'll kick off with Andrea. Can you start by telling us, and by the way, I just remembered, I need to say we're running a little bit behind on schedule, so if you could please be quite concise, that would be much appreciated. Andrea, we'll start off with you. Could you just give us a bit of background, please, on the project? Why mini grid? Why Shedder? I see some questions again around IDPs versus refugees. So maybe again, when you talk about why Shedder, you can address those, and maybe also touch on the business model while you're going.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. Indeed, I'll try to be as concise as possible. So why mini grid in Shedder? The Shedder camp provided us with an excellent opportunity, given the fact that most of the camp was already somewhat pre-electrified by informal diesel-powered microgrid, and therefore the demand was there, existing and solvable. People were already paying for a substandard service, but still they were paying for it, and the demand was also sustained by productive use of energy. So we entered a camp where power was already being used. It was made the choice, obviously, to move on to mini grids, and also we're also able to leverage on the fact that one of the advantages of displacement settings is that they are typically fairly high, provide high density, which allows to reduce also the distribution cost, the unitary distribution cost. So this is a unique situation of most refugee camps, not often and not always the case with IDPs, back to the question in the chat. And the reason why, for example, IDPs are indeed attractive, but there are some other considerations to be made. Is mostly about the remuneration of capital. So to the extent, indeed, we are dealing with an independent power producer who brings in commercial capital, typically reaching break-even in 6 to 10 years, depending obviously on specific cases. The lack of perspective of IDPs often limits the ability to engage with investors on those areas. While indeed with refugee camps, typically we do have much longer, unfortunately, much longer perspective in most settings.
Thanks, Andrea. And one key feature of this project was the public-private partnership of this model. Can you expand a little bit on that, please?
Sure, very much so. So Humanitarian Energy developed these mini-grids in collaboration with its partners. Definitely are two key ones. One was represented by the government through the Agency for Refugees and Returnees, which was extremely instrumental to secure land and facilitate the dialogue with the communities, for instance, by helping setting up a committee of refugees and hosts that could act as liaison between the company and the community, but also obviously Mercy Corps, not only as a key shareholder, but also as a main partner for demand activation through, for example, productive use of energy, financing of electric appliances, which I see is one of the questions. So it was a very virtuous cycle between demand activation and power supply that played well for Shader and proves the scalability of the model.
Thanks a lot. My next question is to Desalaine. Can you please tell us a bit, I see a question in the chat about how long did the installation of the system take? When once you had completed the installation, my question to you was, were there any big surprises in the initial kind of phases of the mini-grid? Over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, the challenges actually started with licensing, actually. So, but I joined, thanks for the team before me. Andrea and the team has secured the license after several discussions with the government, and most of the challenges are related to being the pioneer in the sector for the country. So this is related to, these are also reflected during importation. Because in order to import as a trader, you have to register for electronic single window. And the regulator, which is the Petroleum Energy Authority, is not integrated to the electronic single window. So our license cannot help us to get through this electronic single window system. So we have to go and visit all offices to unlock the manual the manual process. So that is one of the major challenges that we had passed through. And the other major challenge related to this, as everyone might expect, is custom clearance. Because, you know, we are the first, and the custom officials and every regulator knows Ethiopian electric utility. And so whenever we appear there as for importation of electric appliances, so nobody knows us. So we have to explain from how we are established, so everything. So that has been really a big challenge. Despite all these challenges, Shader helped us at least to introduce our presence to the key government stakeholders in the space. Because that is, I think whenever we think about expansion in the coming years, at least every key government stakeholder knows our presence and the presence of private sector in this electricity or mini-grid space. So that will definitely help us. It has contributed for delay for Shader, but for upcoming projects, we have at least placed a good corner stone for the upcoming projects. And maybe on the question related to surprise is, I mean, the number of connections, paid subscriptions was like in the first 2 weeks, we have like more than 750 paid subscription, 100% paid subscription. So this was, I mean, initially we were thinking of our capacity was like 2025 customer connection per day. That was our initial capacity. But the demand was like, I mean, we couldn't cope with that. So we have to revisit and involve more technicians, even inviting some from the national electric utility technicians to keep up the demand, the growing demand. And that was surprising. And maybe one other good thing to mention is because we have a fear that the customer connection for the refugees payment might be a little bit higher for some of the households. So we introduced installment payment for connection fee, but no one was using that. So even up until today, I don't remember more than one or two households use installment payments, but they go for 100% upfront payment. So that was a surprise which we never planned and thought about.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. That's so interesting. Yeah, I think that really emphasizes the importance of when you're speaking about the challenges, how critical good stakeholder relationship management is. And yeah, what an unexpected problem to have with the very high demand at the beginning. I think the question of how to sustain that demand and to now grow it in the second phase remains very relevant. But for that, I have a few questions to Almaz around that topic of what we're doing now to kind of sustain and create that demand. But first, I see quite a few questions around the relationship or the question of the host community. Could you please expand on that?
Thank hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm currently dealing with flu. Initially the mini grid was designed to serve the refugee community, as the host community had access to the national grid. However, due to frequent power interruptions of the national grid, the host community consistently requested access to the mini grid, and we have tried our best to consult the host community representatives and including the regional president office to manage their expectations. The host community is also represented in the community electric committee that Andrea was mentioning earlier to ensure ongoing information exchange and transparency. So to address this, Mercy Corps established a productive use of energy hub, which is connected to the mini grid to serve exclusively the host community businesses. So in total, we are hosting now 16 businesses, including 6 grain millers, which we are hoping to be anchor clients for Human. So this intervention at the same time has contributed to job creation for the host community through business operations and related services. But at the same time, like assessing the load, Human is currently extending its connections to the host community, households and businesses who are previously not covered by the national grid. So currently, a little over 100 households and businesses are benefiting from the mini grid electricity, and also the host community in general is benefiting from a street lighting. At the same time, we are exploring other options, like partnering with other development partners to explore support for both host and refugee community businesses to increase energy consumption and improving services delivery. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Dr. Alma. It's really interesting. I was wondering, can you give us an update now that the mini grid's been up and running for over about 1.5 years now? What are you currently working on to further enhance energy access?
Yeah, thank you. You know, currently Mercy Corps has two major priorities to increase energy consumption so that we can ensure the sustainability of energy access delivery model, as this is a pilot program. So the first one is by supporting businesses and households through cost share grant to use electricity demanding appliances and improve their well-being, livelihood, and also improve the service to the community. So far, we have supported 26 small and medium enterprises, including grain millers, to purchase appliances. We will continue to do so for more viable business and interested households to create more demand. And the second priority area, which I believe will be very interesting, is that we are in the process of introducing and testing three kind of electric cooking stoves to help we're planning to test on 60 households and businesses to help them transition away from biomass use. The stoves include like pressure cooker, induction, and infrared stoves. One is if the mini grid system can handle cooking. If the community decides to transition to electricity use. And the second is if the stoves are compatible with the cooking culture of Somali refugee community. So the good thing here is that when we were selecting this 60 households, the community is very open to try this alternative. And at the same time, the cost of charcoal became very expensive, and the community is willing to explore and try alternative solutions. And we hope that one or more of the stoves will satisfy their cooking needs. Thank you, Megan.
Great, thank you. Really interesting. Andrea, quick last question, and then we'll try and see if there's any last questions we can take from the audience. But I think the $1 million question is, like, it's worked in Cheddar, will it work elsewhere? And can you reflect a bit on, is there anything you'd like to share maybe about specific expansion plans currently?
Sure, thank you. I mean, as mentioned before, indeed, also by the colleague, it's case specific. It can work elsewhere, and for sure it will work elsewhere based on our experience in Cheddar. There are other, obviously, opportunities to sort of home system and other technologies for different contexts. We are indeed expanding in other areas of the country where we see this potential for mini grids to be a cost-effective solution to serve those communities. Specifically, we also want to push further scalability by focusing on larger sites and potentially also anchoring them onto larger clients such as UN operations, water systems, and so on, that can also further increase viability and attract additional private capitals that we can blend together with grants and other concessional forms of capital. The company is expanding the southern part of the country in the Liban zone. We're targeting 3 sites, each of them 3 to 4 times bigger than Cheddar, so you can see the scale that the company, together with Mercy Corps and partner, are trying to achieve here. And the company is very much on track to reach financial closing and start construction in the following few quarters.
Great, thank you all so much for those answers. I'm aware that we're almost at time, but there's also been some really interesting questions that have come in through the chat. Amy, I'll give you the tricky job of picking out which ones we're going to answer.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, colleagues, for sharing more. It's really, really interesting. Maybe one question that's coming up is kind of around the business model. So as it is a private sector-led delivery model, can panelists maybe touch on the return on investment, or I think here's a question, how is it structured in terms of grant, debt, and equity? So I don't know if Andrea or Desalin, if you want to take that one.
Okay, Desalin, please let me know. I'll start it off. Feel free to complement. United Energy operates an IPP, so as an independent power producer. The company fundraises through its investors, donors, and lenders, designs, deploys, and operate the assets. So under a concessional mechanism that applies to Ethiopia, those assets are owned and managed by the utility, which repays through the revenues deriving obviously from the sale of electricity. Concessions are usually, and the same for Ethiopia, for a determined period of time, which isn't enough for the developer indeed to recover his investment and draw enough profit to remunerate the capital that has been provided to the company. So there's full ownership from fundraising to construction, design, and operations.
Thanks, Andrea. And Desalin, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing, as Andrea said, is finding the right balance of the financing mix, depending on the size, the nature of the project, and the scale. I mean, that's the important thing to consider. And grant plays a big part, especially when it comes to the lowering the tariff for the community we serve, since they have low paying ability, even though the need is there, but some households have still have to consider their ability to pay. So to lower the tariff, the grant contribution should also be really significant enough.
Great, thanks, Desalin. And I see we're at time. I'll maybe pose one last question and we can wrap up. So do you think there's room for solar home system energy as a service model as a complementary solution? Could this also kind of provide a complementary service at a lower cost due to the lower CapEx investment? I don't know, Desalin, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, this is maybe related to regulation wise. I mean, we cannot, humanitarian energy is registered as a foreign direct investment. So as per Ethiopian regulation, a foreign direct, a foreign company cannot engage in retail business. So solar home system sale will be considered as a retail. So in that case, it's for human, we will continue to do the mini grid business. That is, but the regulation is being reviewed. It's under revision, but not yet official. So we have to wait to complement some of the, especially in Dolo, there could be some households who will be better served through solar home systems and mini grid. So it's an opportunity, but the regulation, we have to see how the regulation will allow us to engage in that.
Great, thank you, Desalin. And I think many of the other questions were answered. So thank you, colleagues, very much for the insightful discussion. I think we'll wrap up here as we're at time. We want to thank you all so much for joining. I think we could probably speak for another few hours on this one, and hopefully we'll have more space at future events as well to dive deeper. But a big congrats to the Human and Mercy Corps team on this one. And if you do have any questions, please reach out. If you are a private sector company that wants more information on working in displacement settings, please reach out to the GPA and Mercy Corps as well. And yeah, just want to thank you for your time, presence, and yeah, we can wrap up there. Thanks, colleagues. Wish you a wonderful rest of your day.